Kingdom of Verona has gone through several points within history and has shown itself to a unique part of Renaissance Europe. It was the first to introduce females to the army, but some of the first to fall to infighting due to the rise of what was later called the gender war within the European continent. It took many years for this region and its peoples to recover, and the long-lasting divide still lingers in the hearts of all the old Verona lands. As the ways of change try the best against old odds, the kingdom, its remnants, and its radical ideas bring forth a nation like no other. The Kingdom of Verona was a state created after the death of the two main rivaling families, son and daughter of the Montagues and Capulets respectively, on Wednesday 21st of May 1957. The prince, in reaction to the deaths and the hope for true and real lasting peace, created the Kingdom of Verona just 4 days after Romeo and Juliet's tragic death on Sunday 25th of May 1597. And with him as the new king of Verona, and with a new idea allowing for both the grieving of the families to co-opt the lower levels of the government. This, and all the later actions, brought great relief to the prince, the families, and the people of Verona, as all believed that the fighting would now truly end within Verona's streets. But there was one action still required from the prince, now king, to deal with. What will the Republic of Venice say about this little project of his? The reaction to the creation of this kingdom was of immediate confusion, but also the uncaringness to do anything, since it was seen as a benefit to have such a state exist, due to the fact that it had now brought peace to the local area, with which Venice was fully aware of the constant bickering among the families within the region. So it was really just considered as a win-win.
Nice to meet you. Yes, I will let you film me. And yes, I would love to talk about the history of the Veronian kingdom. The very first act of the new kingdom was the creation of statues to represent both Romeo and Juliet so the families could pay equal respect to their losses. The statues were of a male and female conjoined via their hands and crowns being chained together with both almost falling. The importance of these statues create a much more common goal, for unity and peace among the peoples and the families. The plans were now coming together within the princes, now king's favor and goals coming to flourish.
The families of the Capulets and Montagues were now putting together their wealth to bring prosperity to Verona while bringing back peace to themselves, the first within Verona's history. The times of disunity and fighting for really just unknown causes had now reached the end of the road which led to the rebirth of Verona city and even the surrounding area. With the growing strength and now united wealth of the town, it would soon grow into a much more major city within the area and in the entire Italian peninsula, leading to other cities wanting to trade or join. Soon there would be a golden age of Verona. Alongside the point of joining, several other cities around the Veronian kingdom saw their success and believed that their aim was not only for peace, but to unite all Veronians. The process would lead to the first few cities uniting with the Veronian kingdom in New Year's of January 1st, 1600, with 3 surrounding cities. This would then lead to a new governmental policy of unity and peace for all, not just the warring families of Verona, but all Veronians.
Venice was starting to notice the rise of Verona, as they were starting to become the controllers of the region. But there was still no action being taken by Venice, as they were still in the belief of the win-win idea from before. One major point that was reported as to why there was inaction from the Republic to stop this rise was because of the fact that their troops were still and continuously going through the Kingdom of Verona's claimed territory, which led to their idea that there was no real independence anyway.
Verona's golden age would continue without any troubles, and especially with their growing territories would go without end. The growth was immense. They were able to acquire city after city with entire regions integrating into the kingdom. But soon in the year 1620, around the springtime, Venice started to put in policies that started to force action on the kingdom. These new moves via Venice made them become more of an integrated land again of the Republic than the autonomous region they were becoming beforehand.
The Montague family was the most outspoken about these laws being passed that were taking away their gained freedoms. The king and Capulets though did not care much about the Montagues' woes, but they weren't going to be in the way of any of their upcoming actions. The Montagues, in their show of their ill will and contempt of the government in Venice, began growing an underground army using their funds. The king, seeing this, started getting anxious and went to Father Caplet to see if they could counterbalance their actions. Before their talk, the Montague planned to rebel against the Venice government. Their plans were sent just an hour before the rebellion was to accrue. Verona was living on the backs of volunteers for their original protection, but now with the Montague family, they can now protect themselves better than before by bold, and loyalty was a big part to many. Joining in of duty to protect their growing cause and their support of their families. The Caplets responded in kind, but also due to fearing their rise in power and popularity. They were having troubles though, as with the Montagues collecting all the possible manpower within all the friendly lands, did the Caplets have to find a different kind of power, something akin to a carry nation. Woman. Now being used within the armies of Europe, it was a shock of the decision to both the Montagues and even the king. The Caplets' new army were an all-women army, though there were just made as the guards of the major towns and cities, which included Verona, and even then many were kept to the minor roles of guarding. They were still a big deal within the kingdom in a very different way in the wind. Alongside the fact of this new army did it start the new wheels within the Renaissance times, submitting this country and its families as a future-defining moment for all. With the army now twice as big, though ill-prepared, did the army of Venice give in and let them free. This event also led to Venice nearly collapsing, as their government showed that they could be pushed around and start being taken advantage of, such as when Austria took over the Friuli Venezia Giulia of what was under Venetian control. With the near end of Venice and a now protected Verona, would the Golden Age continue forevermore?
The year 1637 would come with mass celebration, as with the defeat of Venice, the 40 years of existence and the new territories which was bringing such unending wealth to the citizens of Verona, was now the time to show their pride of their success. The prince demanded a march across Verona's streets. The Caplets were the only one called upon by the new king, as their fondness of the army of all females felt to him as a great message to the world outside of their uniqueness and attitude, but as well to their vicinity to the city. They were already there defending their capital, which felt like a more meaningful message to the king, leading to the Caplets' army controlling the march. Though with this decision by the king was largely hated by the rural folk, especially by the men of the regions outside the cities. This decision was also protested by the Montagues and the most by the father, due to how he believed that his army was of more importance to the nation, and not just some defending militia force, without mentioning the fact that it was an all-women army. The king would disregard these attempts of character assassination of the Caplets as just little hopes at trying to destabilize the nation during an important time, since they were still at risk of being attacked by the Venetian army, or even the chance of being discredited by the other powers.
The Montagues were left with nothing but a sense of disrespect. The news that one of the families would get better treatment led to themselves distancing from the co-op leader rule that they promised to keep, and to start making their own decisions on their own behalves. Many of the rural peoples were now also starting to pick sides, as one person from the time wrote. It was starting to feel like, as few small pricks of knives were being put into us as a mosaic way of getting us out. The Montagues were the more traditional leaders among the Verona government, even with the times, where they agreed with the Caplets or the king for some things, or importantly the issue of the female army being allowed to form, but mostly doing it as to not look like an enemy to the Caplets and as an enemy to the king's wishes.
The rural people of Verona were the most outspoken of the female army, but not with real words. Rather, they would send anonymous messages via letters to soldiers within the Caplet army. They would also sometimes create works of creation to provide a message to the king and country of the dangers that would come from the use of females, saying things within their plays and literatures about how women were a better use in the caretaking sector of life, and how they're better off just being the protector of homes and children instead of the entire village or cities, where a man could do better. Many also said about how women were frail, weak and just unable to defend cities like Verona and any other in the kingdom. The king was starting to notice the troubles that were occurring within his lands and their growing disunity amongst its people. Reports show letters being written to the Caplet family of his worry and of his needance to fix the errors within his father's kingdom. In one of his letters, he said,
I have seen persons act awry in these lands. The Montagues have shown willingness to go against my orders and have started to put troops and other governmental measures under their control alongside putting them in random new locations. I believe that the only way forward as to protect the integrity of this kingdom is to partially capitulate to some of their demands. One of which is to take over the city of Venice.
After the creation of this letter did the king order the armies of the Montagues to gather around the city of Grisana to create the plans of the invitation from the now weakened Venice to join the kingdom of Verona or be invaded by the Montag army and taken over by force. This action by the king was the attempt of cooling down the fiery flow of the further folk from Verona and other cities, as well to keep the Montagues from going against the king and his peoples. The kingdom was to soon be a yin-yang of sorts, as to respect the original promise of the co-oped kingdom and its original king.
But still believed in the purpose of unity among the families by the grand order of his father, which was to keep the streets of Verona, which also now referenced the entire kingdom of Verona, at peace and without war, leading to him discrediting his comments about worry over the possible power of the Montagues. Besides, the king was the king. After some time passed, the king's aspirations were seemingly becoming true. The rural populations of the countryside were decreasingly unruly by the day and were more serving of the king than ever before. The most important of all was the return of friendly relationships among the Montagues with both the king and the Caplets. All was seemingly well established now. All that was left was to execute the orders to send over the Montagues to gather all they needed from the Venetians, whether it would be from peace or from war.
Dear Dina, I have come with lovely news. We are on our way to fix what was ruined by our brotherly enemies. Our people of this beautiful kingdom of ours and its little king can now feel the might that we bring. Verona will be saved, and we will bring all that was deserved from the first days. In part of the front units of our true false army, we will reach the border of Venice without alarm, and once we do,
we will turn around and head forth swiftly to our true destination.
The expedition was sent out on the 14th of August, 1637. The country was ready for war, all parts of the kingdom were ready for war. Every man, and now women, was ready for anything that was to come. The Montagues branch of the military was the most excited for the war. They felt their duty the most, as it felt the most, and even exercised their lowest amount of endearment to the king and country, both the leading and leaders of the families and the children amongst them. All was now set in stone for war, which the king was expecting, as the most likely action that would come from the Republic of Venice. Father Caplet was the weariest of the entire country, no inch of his body was not in eruption. He felt the change in the winds, the discernment, as was being written into his pages of journals. But the legion went forth to the grand city, the wave not to be stopped now. By the 14th the Montag army was out of the visions of all major cities, now being left to the sight of the rural folk. The 15th is when some of the first issues were being reported. Many of the locals reported of conflicting reports noting of attacks against them and their posts, stores and homes, calling of rebellion, or mostly of attack, but also reporting familiar sights in clothing and equipment. Nonetheless, the kingdom was still in the understanding of the coming known issue. On the 16th, the day they should have arrived at the border with the Republic of Venice, there was nothing. Nothing but the one scout sent to watch over that reported of a pause around 16 meters away from the border line that they would have entered. The scout came back worried with the sense that they may have forgotten something important or were in need of assistance. All that was left now was to wait and see what was to happen next. At around 4 a.m. on the 17th did a letter come in from a scout coming back from what was seemingly a battle. The king saw what was inside the message and spent very little time reading.
This is Father Montague with his loyal army. We send the regards of our disappointment with the king and country. With that fact subsided, we have come to the conclusion of the need for change. We, with our allies, in the areas for which you have shown uncaringness to, have declared war and are no longer of your possession.
Civil war it was. Civil war it will be.
Rebellion. Rebellion was what was happening. The rural areas of Verona were up in arms. This was the breaking point. The no return and had already sealed what was going to be the history of this state. The Civil War would encompass almost all the rural regions beyond the Lago di Garda due to his foresight that Father Caplet had idealized beforehand and took him his own admission to build up his own legions of loyalists of all the major areas behind the Lake Garda as to not have to fight on his own alone on a two-front war that he knew would be unwinnable. In any case, they were in for some serious dumpster diving.
The Grand Army of the Montagu, as the rebellious state would be called via the name that the family gave their army, were already on their way to the main city and their target, Verona.
The king's worries for the Caplet's army, and if it could actually stand against such a prepared army of the Montag, as the fact was, Caplet's armies never saw any battles. All they had was their training, and those strong will to defend, as their opportunity of a lifetime to prove to the king that they were able was coming without much of any experience to show that they were possible. The king thought of bringing in other loyal armies from their remaining rural regions, but the Caplet father warned of the instability that would come, as more Montag loyalists could rise, so that plan was put away as too dangerous. The civil war would start to close in on its true goal of Verona's capture. The Grand Army of the Montag would begin their march right after they saw the king's envoy. The scout left their place of end for which they turned around and headed for the new capture point.
On the same day as they reached the border, they went back to Padua and checked the city's dry of supplies and forcing out all defending Caplet forces. On the 17th they reached the city of Vicenza, once again, robbed clean of the city of everything it had to offer and of all the so-called Caplet loyalists. On the 18th they were forced to pause at the city of Torre, confined due to the heavier resistance that they faced trying to leave the outer city areas of Vicenza. On the 19th they reached the outskirts of Verona. The city was fully enclosed off now, no routes to leave to and from, with a siege soon beginning at around dawn as reports show their attempt at complete surprise. On the 20th was the day of the siege. It was in quick speed, through the city's outer defenses and into the main area of the wall's defenses. They were becoming fierce. Both the Grand Army of the Montagu and the armies of the Caplets were in battle once again, but by armies of genders. Both sides fought ferociously against one another, even with the inexperience from each of themselves and the inability to understand war as neither side had fought any real war besides their old meaningless fights and what training had taught them. The fighting in Verona streets was at the highest point in its history.
From what we read from eyewitness reports, we can see that the Grand Army of the Montagus was gaining the upper hand, which was due to their numeric superiority, and when the Montagus would find loyalist cells within Verona, which rose up when the Montagus would be near. The fighting would reach closer to home by the minute. The main building, the King's Place of Residence, which also held the homes of both the Caplets and Montagues that were made after the creation of the kingdom, was now in the sights of the armies of Montague. Father Montague, who was leading the army into battle, left without a word. Many did see his leave but didn't know where. Soon though they knew where he was. The middle-aged father was on the side of the castle climbing up the walls, which protected the main building, which was told by both side eyewitness reports. The father soon reached inside of the building but without any scout or other with him. The old plan showed that he knew of the emptiness of the building and how no guards would lay within the building besides the families of the Caplets, and importantly, the king.
王国最後の僕の最後の数時間は
was decided by single final battle between not their armies, but their fathers.
After Father Montague entered the castle and made his way through the castle's inners, and he made it to the last room he would need to enter. Father Montague entered the room containing both Father Caplet and the king.
Now, there are problems with what we know of the events during their altercation and the ensuing battle that happened, as the reports came from no one else but the people within the room at the time, and that no one else has came to the room before, during, or after the ensuing battle. So we only have the cases that were provided by both fathers afterward and the small notes that were left by the king before he disappeared. In that case, we will show off the two events that have been told by the fathers and then the king.
I, great Montague, gave those left beings a great leap of love, to smite them down, but of course that rotten king got within my way, as he tried as he does to severely bring his little so-called peace to this damaged land, which all but gave him death. For that Catholic bastard, I gave him a few swipes, but like the slimy, lying, secret little man he is, he escaped. Division is all that is now left, for if he and his stains live. Dear Generals, I come to you with deadly news. I, luckily, escaped by the death-held hands of Father Montague, but the safety of the king due to his attempts of trying to settle down the growingly tense situation led to his injury, and now of his disappearance to an unknown location. I called for the king to stay away but in close distance, but it seemed to have translated to his escape to some place I am sadly unknowing of. But now due to his disappearance, there is no leader in charge high enough or not in traitorous thought, other than me. From now on until the war has concluded or has reached a tangential situation, I will show leader, and as such all commands will now be in the direction of me until further notice.
The final written page of the battle was found within the king's journal. His journal was found next to the Adige River.
Dear all who see, I, the king of the kingdom of Verona, hear with the cries of a dying man. I was struck. Under my heart laid Father Montague's blade, his blade being the fact of my escape. I had to run, nothing was left of my dying life anyways. My lovely, living, looming kingdom was meant to bring out the growing greatness in all. The dream of my father, the original prince, asked of me before his death to bring peace and stability, by all costs, even if it went against new or even old ways or of anything else within the European continent. The Montagues' blade brought forth the end of this kingdom and the end of what the prince fought for. The change from the prince made his hand feel forced and his power taken away, from which none was true. but I still regret all hurt done to his heart. The Caplets led the same idea as I, peace and unity. Hell, by heaven's name, he was more into that idea of peace and unity. He wanted all to be with this equality idea, which meant for the world to have the right as man, do as the Father did say. All was for to bring peace to his daughter, as her want of choice in her life was something that he had felt was a promise that was indirectly given to him. I called upon the Venice government to do anything, but nothing came besides stopping border incursions and the little bits of investigation. So for me, death was what was left. Now is just a waiting game.